Jim Borden, how you doing, my friend?
Doing great, Eric. Good to see you.
Likewise. So last time you were here, we dang near broke the internet with all the knowledge you dropped on actions and action making and timing and firing pin protrusion and all that good stuff. If you guys haven't seen it, just go look. Just search for Jim Borden under Believe the Target. There's tons of stuff there. All things actions. So Jim Borden is the owner of Borden Rifles, Borden Accuracy. You've been making actions for how long, Jim?
Since June of 2001. So almost 24 years.
24 years. You're a Benchrest Hall of Fame member. I did not realize how much weight that carries until I went and attended my very first Benchrest match. Because, it's like, okay, well, you go, you shoot Benchrest, and you get into the Hall of Fame. Well, I didn't realize there's only 55 people that have ever made it into the Benchrest.
Since 1949.
Since 1949, only 55 people. So not even one per year.
No.
And of those 55, I think I heard that only about 30 are living today. So
probably roughly, yeah.
It is not an easy task to get into the Benchrest Hall of Fame.
No, it's something most shooters that shoot Benchrest strive for, and I don't know. I don't know how this is going to sound, but I was an avid competitor, and I liked to compete, but I was usually competing against myself, and I was always fussing with equipment. Always fussing with, how can I make this better? How can I make that better? How are the bullets better? And I never, ever thought about the Hall of Fame until I had 4 or 5 Hall of Fame points, because I just kind of took it, somebody came to me and said, hey, Jim, you won a championship today. You've got a Hall of Fame point. That first one was in 1987, I think. And I said, oh, cool. Okay. And I revered the people that were in it at the time, the Paul Harts and the rest of them, and Jack Demings, and I don't know, it just kind of, I focused on making my equipment do what I wanted the equipment to do, and focused on a behavior that wasn't win-win-win. In my head, I wanted to win. I went to the match to win, but I just focused on beating myself. And the next thing I knew, there I was. I had 10 Hall of Fame points, and that week, in fact, people, I couldn't understand why Tony Boyer and some others kept coming over to my loading pop-up and stuff and talking to me and doing good, because I always stayed away from the Wailing Wall. I did not visit the Wailing Wall. And if somebody came by and started talking, shut up. I didn't want to know.
Yeah, so the Wailing Wall, for those of you that don't know, that's where they post the results of every match. So
right.
You guys have heard me talk about that. I don't worry about the results until it's over. When it's over, it's over.
Exactly.
You did good or you did bad, it doesn't matter. You looking at it every match is not going to help in any way. So that's what you're talking about.
And in fact, it can hurt you. Those guys that go and say, well, next time out there, I got to shoot a 0 group. They put so much pressure on themselves about shooting the 0 group, they forget to look at the conditions between the muzzle and the target. They're tense with their shoulder, their face. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Same thing in F class. You can tense yourself up to the point where all of a sudden you don't have follow through and you start throwing shots around. Yeah. And so, but anyhow, it was an honor to become a member of that.
That's interesting that you say that, because a lot of people believe because you're shooting off a rest in a sandbag that there's very little input from the shooter needed to shoot good. But in reality, it's not we're not trying to shoot one-way groups. You guys are trying to shoot groups into zeros, meaning
Yep.
you're trying to put 5 shots in a group that looks like 1 shot. So,
Yep.
I mean, I've been there. I've shot one benchers match, and I shot a group. I think my biggest group that weekend was like a 350, which 350,000 for 5 shots. And I know most people watching this are thinking, my goodness, that's an amazing group. Not in that crowd. I needed to be shooting in the ones to stay competitive. I still ended up 10th overall, but
that's very good.
But my goodness, I mean, I was shooting groups in the ones, low ones, mid ones. In practice, I shot a group into zeros. The wind was calm, and I was using Jeff Pinehart's equipment, so he had it all dialed in. But the point is, when you're shooting ones and you look around, everybody else is shooting ones, and you shoot a 3, like 3 something, that's an ag killer. I mean, it just...
Yep. Deep dive.
But I just thought, well, whatever. I'm not here to win. I'm just here to learn. So I just kept going, and when it was all said and done, I ended up 10th place.
Yep.
All right, I'll take it. But
yeah.
Bottom line is, you say you talk about follow through and staying in the moment and staying focused with the wind and everything. It is so little that can go. It requires so little to go wrong for it to make a big difference.
And I get guys with guns all the time that call and say, well, I'm struggling. I'm only shooting half minute of angle with my hunting gun. Jim, you said it'd be shooting better than this and blah, 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 blah. And I'm shooting in dead calm conditions. And I tell them, no such thing as dead calm. And they say, what do you mean, Jim, a half minute? I said, just think about it. The caliber that you're shooting, 2.5 mile an hour wind to the right, changes and go, which you can hardly feel on your cheek. You have difficulty seeing it without wind flags or something. That wind stops and reverses 2.5 mile an hour from the left. That's a 5 mile an hour change, which is worth roughly 0.4 inches at 100 yards with most calibers. And that's where the thinking of, those guys, they got it all locked in. They've got it on a rest. They got it in bags. And I've taken guys to the range before and say, okay, here you go. Sit down. Here's my PPC. Sit down. Shoot it. And sit there and watch them shoot and switches and stuff like that. And they say, something's wrong with the gun. I'll sit down and boom, put them on. And then I start talking to them about, this is what you did. This is what the competition's about. Bench rest competition, you gotta have the screaming gun, but you gotta be a screaming shooter, be sitting behind that screaming gun to be able to successfully compete and win. That's because because a lot of the guns on the line all can shoot about the same kind of ags. It comes down to the shooter's ability to handle the gun, shoot the gun, plus read the wind in the mirage. And you've got to put that whole system together to be able to shoot consistently. It's easy to get to half minute. But once you start going from half minute to 3/16 minute to 1/8 minute, that's one of those asymptote slopes, if you know what I mean. The effort that it takes to get there, and the concentration and the knowledge and the skill, it gets harder and harder and harder as you go down that curve. So,
you talk about shooting in the wrong conditions. When I went and shot that benchers match, I was doing well. I mean, I was shooting in the ones, just rocking and rolling. And Jeff Pinehart would stand behind me. Him and Andy would stand behind me with the spotting scope. And it was mainly Andy, but Jeff had walked up, and I'm shooting. And all the flags were green. They were all showing green. That means the wind was coming from whichever side. I don't know. I don't remember which way is green, which way is orange. The point is, I mean, I'm dotting up. I got 4 shots just dotted all up, and then I saw one flag turn orange, and I thought that ain't gonna be enough to make it. And I shot it, and I mean, I put paper between the holes. You know, I had, and the minute I saw that, I looked back and Jeff and Andy both kind of shaking their head. So I was like, all right, guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't think it was going to make that big of a difference. I thought, you know, I mean, I probably had a 0 going. I thought, okay, I don't know how much it moves. I'm just going to send it. I'll probably end up in the 1s. I just wanted to conserve my 1 ag. No, that thing went out there.
It went out the window.
And later, same situation happened again. I was dotting them all up, and right before my 5th shot, I saw a flag change, and I stopped. And I waited a good 20, 30 seconds. The flag came back. I shot my last shot, and it went right to the same hole. And I looked back, and Jeff and Andy were back there. They weren't actually clapping, but they were like, kind of like, good job. That's what you're supposed to do. Just stop. If you don't know how much to move, just stop and wait for it. But it was scary. It was really scary to have to stop, because there's always that doubt in your mind of what have I just done? I was doing so good. Why did I stop? And stopping is one of the hardest things that you can ever do when you're got a tiny group or even a good score going. But you know, sometimes it works, and the majority of times it's the best thing to do. At least do something about it.
Yeah. And I was what they call a doper. I would and some ranges, particularly Fairchance and South Creek, I had shot those ranges enough that I just kind of knew, okay, that flag changed from here to there. I need to hold 1 ring, or I need to hold up and to the left, a half a ring. And I would keep shooting as I see that change coming and keep putting them through the same hole, because stopping sometimes played with my head. And so I learned, now there was other ranges like Kelby's range that I couldn't dope. I just never, because the left side of that range, the middle of the range, and the right side of the range all behave differently, and changes in the flags behave differently. And for me, it was hard to keep all of that in this hard drive up here of how much those little changes were on what part of the range. So I always played it safe there and stopped.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the talk about the screaming shooter, right? I mean, you have a gun that that can do it. It'll put them exactly where you tell it. And that's sometimes the problem, that if you tell it to go there, it's going to go there. And now you just have a big group. But anyway. All right, Jim. Let's talk about actions. I mean, that's what you do best. I mean, you shot benches pretty darn good, but action making is really what got you where you are now. I mean, you kind of said it when we started this podcast, that you were always tinkering with your equipment. The way that, if I understand it correctly, the way that you would gain your points, your Hall of Fame points, or your wins, is by making sure you had a better equipment than everybody else.
Right.
So that kind of led you down this path of making your own actions and all that other stuff. You are an engineer, mechanical engineer, so I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, and always trying to make the best action possible.
Right. Yep. And just the way I was taught when I was a kid was if something broke or isn't working the way that you want it to work, what do you need to do to that part, so that if it was something that was breaking, that you didn't have to work on it again to make it not break, or if it wasn't doing exactly what you wanted it to do, what did you need to do to it to get it what you wanted it to do and do better. Never kind of never be satisfied with the status quo.
Okay.
Is you know.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I've been a competitor for a long time, and we're always looking for the
Yeah.
next, because we're not even looking for
Things.
big things, right? We're looking for minute
For
things.
little things.
It's like,
Yeah.
what can I do to just get, you know,
Yeah.
I just need to win by 1 point. I don't need to win by 10. I just need to win
Yeah.
by 1 point.
1 point.
1x.
Yeah.
So, all right, what do you want to talk about, Jim? What do you have for us today?
I've got some show and tell things here. I hope they show up well in what we're doing. But my daughter and I are going to be doing some detailed videos, the close-ups that show some of the things I want to talk about today. But I wanted to hit on these things around the fire control system. You and Speedy and F-Class John have certainly helped point out to people that fire control systems are extremely important. And I've been working on fire control systems since the late 1970s to make them what they are today. But then showing folks where things are dragging or binding or whatever that can impact on the precision of their equipment. And notice I say the word precision versus accuracy, because we're talking about putting all the bullets through the same hole in an accurate manner. You're shooting F-class score, so you want to hit the X, but you want to hit the X every time. So hitting the X or in the X circle is about accuracy. Precision is hitting the same place in the X circle, exactly the same place every time is the precision.
Yeah, so precise, it's kind of like bench rest for a group, right? Like, you don't care where the group is.
It's putting them all through the same hole.
Just go through the same hole. Accuracy is in the center of the paper.
Yes,
or center of the target. So,
yeah.
The way I describe it is precision is the equipment, accuracy is the shooter, right? Because you can have the most
putting it where you want to put it.
Yeah. So you talk about precision, like what you can do. This is kind of why, you know, we work Cortina Precision, because we can help you shrink your groups. The accuracy part, that's on you.
Exactly. Good way to put it. Right.
So precision, that's putting the shots to the same hole. That's going to be your equipment. That's going to be your ignition system. That's going to be the firing pin. That's going to be the, you know, I when I learned from Speedy, the first thing I learned from him was, he said, if I had to take a Remington 700 and somebody said, look, you have only one choice. You can either blueprint the action, you know, recut the threads, face the action, cut the lugs, or you can rework the bolt, you know, the firing pin, the firing pin spring, the shroud, the ignition system. He goes, if I had only one choice, I would do the ignition system, which is precisely what nobody does. Anytime you go and blueprint a Remington 700, they never focus on the ignition system. Yeah,
the bolt and the ignition system, the fit of the bolt to the action, which interacts with the ignition system, and then the cock and piece, the shroud, the firing pin, the spring, and the inside of the bolt.
Right.
All of those things have to go together and be perfect to get that precision. That's exactly right. And that's why, and you know, a lot of people take a look at it and say, well, and since a lot of the videos are out and yours and Speedy's training of folks, it's been phenomenal. And some folks have started taking a look at it so anally that I get emergency calls. Jim, I've got marks on my cock and piece. I've got drag. Well, we have to back up from there. A firing pin system that doesn't have roller bearings or anything, that has a shaft sliding inside of a hole, the firing pin tip sliding inside of a hole, and a cocking piece that's sliding inside of the slot is going to have drag. The key to the precision is that that drag is the same every time you cock and fire that gun. So there's the drag that's always going to be there, and then there's the inconsistent drag, like you guys have been pointing out to people, the binding, how things, when you put the fire control system in the bolt standing up and then you turn the bolt the other way, that firing pin and cocking piece should fall clunk, 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 back and forth, just free fall. Where I wanted to clear up for folks was some of the things, and we're going to take a look at a cocking piece right there. And some folks are worried about marks down the side of the cocking piece, down the surface here. Well, if you take a look at that, we better have marks there. Because when you look at an action, when you go to close it and open it, that shroud and the cocking piece, and you close the bolt, and I don't know how well this is going to work, but you open the bolt, you'll notice that cocking piece rocks in there from side to side in that slot. That's mechanically how that works. Now, what we wanted to do is, so when we've cocked it and we touch the trigger off and that thing falls, is it falls in the same path every time, falls with the same resistance every time. And so that's a lot what we focused on in the fire control systems of our actions, is the fit and finish of those cocking pieces and the slot. To have, if they're too tight, they're going to bind. Once you have binding, it's hard to get consistent binding from shot to shot. So you got to have just enough clearance so it doesn't bind, but not too much clearance so that the cocking piece rocks this way one time and this way the next time, because that affects how it engages with the sear bar on the trigger. And like I said, we're going to do some detailed close-up so people visually can see the sides of the cocking pieces and how it works inside the action. And the whole concept of marks on a firing pin, you had a very good video that you were showing some folks with some Remingtons that the shroud was actually digging in to the firing pin shaft. That's bad juju there. That's not going to be consistent. If you're digging it, it's going to have a different fall and a different energy of fall, which means that it's not going to hit the primer with the same energy, which means the gun's not going to light off the same, which means the harmonic of the barrel's not going to be the same. End result, when you look at the target, that means the bullet impacted someplace where you didn't want it to impact, or different than where you expected it to impact. And the whole concept of fire control systems has come, it's like Remington's, Remington's have the firing pin in a hole, so it guides here, and then this is the secondary guide in a Remington. Notice that little short firing pin. Okay, that tip, the firing pin fall on a Remington is close to 300 thousandths long. That tip is nowhere near that long, and that means when you cock the gun, that firing pin tip retracts out of the hole in the front of the bolt. See that little short
Right.
hole right there. And so Remingtons and Winchester Model 70s, and I think the Rugers use here and here. Well, the fallacy of that, as you well know, it's hard to gun drill a hole that long, dead straight. And in the early days of Remington, the 721s and 722s, they used a piece of tubing and made a separate head. So those bolts were actually three-piece bolts, and the 700s were three-piece, or this one's a three-piece bolt. It's the head, the tube, and the handle. And what they did is, and in this, you can see where that doesn't focus very well. I'm sorry, this isn't coming out as well as I was hoping. But you can see where that head is pressed into that tube and then pinned to that tube. And the early ones, they did a very good job of making them straight so that the firing pin guidance system worked using the boss of the firing pin boss versus the tip. And as production years went on, they had trouble controlling their tolerances and started putting the heads on a little crooked, and ended up reducing the diameter of the boss on the firing pin, which now gives that firing pin all sorts of room to bounce around inside there. So when you cock the gun, and I learned this, I don't know, in the early 80s, and Kenny Jarrett at the same time was struggling with some Remingtons. He'd have them shooting them. He'd say, "Geez, Jim," he'd call and say, "Geez, Jim, I've got one here, the same load, same brand of barrel, blah, 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 and it's just shooting like a house fire. The other one's not shooting well." He said, "I accidentally swapped the bolts between the guns. Now the problem, gun shoots, and the good gun doesn't shoot." I said, "Ken, the firing pin's leaving the hole in the front of the bolt." "Well, what do you do about that, Jim?" And I told him what I do of bushing the firing pin hole in the bolt and put the firing pin on the grinder. And good old Kenny, his good friend, he says, "Nah, I'm going to throw the bolt in the trash and get another bolt." And so, which, I mean, both ways worked. And then, in fact, that was when I started thinking about why am I fixing these Remingtons instead of making my own? But that turns into something else. But so what we ended up doing was we would bore this out, bore this out, and put a plug in here that was the diameter of the bolt face and came down in there about that far. And then change the firing pin tip from short and stubby to long. So now when we cocked the bolt, the hole in the bolt got longer, so that now when we cocked the bolt, the firing pin never left that hole, and we don't guide off of this anymore. I had one individual worried about putting this on a thing and saying, "Geez, Jim," on a V-block, "Geez, Jim, put this in a V-block and the firing pin tip running perfect, but this boss doesn't run exactly as perfect as the firing pin tip." Like I told him, it doesn't matter. We don't control that boss. I focus on controlling the tip of the firing pin to be concentric to the shaft of the firing pin. That boss is there just to have a place for the spring to rest against, because that boss is not supposed to be guiding and touching inside the bolt, just the firing pin tip and the shaft. And thereby, now on a Remington, you would not get marks on this firing pin tip up here, because that tip was made so it would center in the hole of the bolt when the bolt fired, because the guidance came off of this boss. This is where the firing pin would ride inside the bolt and here, and in a perfect world, the bolt face was put in so that the hole was centered, and that firing pin tip would go through the hole without ever touching the hole. But later production, as Remington went on, like I said, as this boss got smaller, the heads got put on crooked, then this tip started hitting the edge of that hole, and the precision of those rifles, some of them you couldn't get to shoot a minute and a half out of the box. You could true up the threads if you wanted to in the action. You could true the bolt lug abutments. You could perfectly align the barrel. You could do a perfect bedding job, still shot a minute and a half, because the firing pin tip was coming out of the hole, and when you fired it, it was randomly bouncing to hit the edges of that hole. So our firing pins are made to guide in the shroud back here, and in the firing pin hole in the bolt face of the bolt up here. So when you look at one of our firing pins that's been fired a number of times, there's going to be a slight rub mark. Shouldn't be a dig, shouldn't be a tear, but there will be a rub mark on the side of that, because when you cock the bolt, that's what's holding on to the firing pin to keep it in place, and so it's going to rub in the same place in the action all the time. Now you can get rid of the evident marking by making the firing pin rotate in the cocking piece so that every time you cock the gun it's not in the same place, but inside the bolt, that firing pin tip hole is going to have the same rub mark in the same place because of the effect of the cocking piece bearing against the slot in the action. And when you lift the bolt handle, it puts a load on the firing pin, and that firing pin tip is doing its job when it has a mark. If I would get extremely worried if it didn't have a mark on it. I'd say we'd have an oversized firing pin hole accidentally or something, and that the firing pin was trying to guide on the boss so that the firing pin wasn't hitting the inside of the firing pin hole. But and so those are things for guys to look for and not obsess over the mark on the tip of the firing pin, or that they look for digs, look for how smooth it is, and make sure that it free flies through the shroud, and the speedy cuts have been great at decreasing our lock time, which then leads us to being able to reduce or to have room now to put weights on the back of the cocking pieces and use weaker springs to go back to the lock time that has been working for us without slowing the lock time down so much where it would have an impact. And I don't know if everybody can follow that reasoning that I was just going through, but it's anything that we've been able to do with us guys working together, Alex Wheeler, Speedy, myself, and others, and you, Eric, of continuously working to get different forms of friction out of the firing pin shaft to shroud, allows us now to say, hey, how can we start moving in a direction to have the precision and have the manipulative ability of the action, the bolt cycling, manipulative, which is important to hunters too. Because if they need a follow-up shot, they don't want a bolt that they want it to cycle forward, close easy, and if they fire the shot, they don't want to have to wrestle with the bolt to open the bolt. So there's some of the thought processes that I've had about the whole fire control system and shrouds. I like bayonet style shrouds from the standpoint of reducing friction and having the shroud stay put. I just never moved to them because what I figured I have to have for lug abutment size, particularly with a closed, if I would used a closed shroud, the lug abutment size that I'd have to have is pretty tough to do in a 700 diameter bolt. And that's one of the things the Black Knight series may allow us to revisit again is, hey, can we make quicker disassembly able by putting the lug style thing on and get rid of the threads, because anytime you have threads, there's resistance to operation. You just got to make sure those threads are true. And the long boss that we have on the shroud, and what you've been doing with the Remingtons with the fitted bosses for folks that want to get the absolute last ounce out of a Remington is a good way to go. In a production environment, making fitted bosses is time consuming and can be done. It would just add another cost to manufacturing and selling the action to actually have to lap every shroud in instead of having the fit where it's almost a fitted boss. And that's something I intend to experiment with the new railgun that I'm building. And the railgun I'm building, I'm doing like you. I'm not going to use a barrel block. It's a bedding block to have an action in so that I have the harmonics trying to emulate what a barreled action would be in a hunting stock or a competition stock.
You talked about your Black Knight actions. That's the latest iteration of your Borden actions.
Yes.
I know I have one, and I will be shooting it on the channel very soon. People are going to see it very soon. It's anyway, I'm excited about it. But tell us what this Black Knight action does compared to the old version of the action. What are you gaining with the Black Knight?
What excites me about the Black Knight series, the Black Knight and the Black Knight XD, is I was looking at the whole neutral closing of the bolt, the timing. Neutral closing and 250 thousandths firing pin fall and 24 to 28 pound springs and ways to ease the bolt lift. Well, one of the things that I looked at is after I started making the actions for the Lapua cartridges for the hunting rifles, the action we call the Bigfoot, it uses a nominally 750 diameter bolt and bigger lugs to take the pressure or the force that a Lapua has, same pressure, but the impact force on the lugsies of the action. I got looking at that and feeling them, and at the same time, Speedy was doing work with Gary Costello with the BRMXDs and doing some fire control things. But I looked at it and said, geez, if I take the fire control things and we take the bigger diameter bolt, that means I can do a bigger diameter on the nose of the cocking piece. I can have a wider cocking cam. I can have less PSI in my cocking cam so that the same spring pressure and same firing pin fall, I will have an easier bolt lift. And by going from 435 raceways in the action to 480 raceways, high raceways, and taking the lugs of the bolt up to compensate for the fact that I took the bolt diameter up, I need to provide more lug surface area if I'm going to continue to use 1 1/16, 18 threads for the competition family of things, not like the Lapua where I took it to an 1 1/8 tenon. I was going to have more lug surface. Well, that lug surface then ends up in the taller lugs. Even though my bolts right now are known for how smoothly they operate and how smooth they go up and down the action, don't bind. Now you go to a 750 diameter bolt with the thicker lugs, it gets even better. Because now we got a bigger hole, bigger spade, and that whole anti-bind concept starts getting better. And then on top of that, I wanted a new and different platform to be able to start experimenting with fire control and different methods of timing of the ignition system. And working with Speedy with the weight things, and I wanted to get the first Black Knight XDs out there without compounding it with having the extra weights come with them at that time, because I wanted to get the performance proven to be equal to or better than the BRM XD, but having handling improvements, bolt manipulation improvements over the BRM XD with equal or better performance with the fire control, basically the same as the BRM XD was set up. And then everybody that's gotten a Black Knight XD action so far in the next 2 or 3 months will get a kit, because it was included with the price of the action when they were sold. Get a new cocking piece. I was going to do 2 weights. I've decided on 3 weights, a 1/4 inch long, a 3/8 inch long, and a 1/2 inch long tungsten weight. The back of the cocking piece is threaded, 832. And then the screws, the way the weights are made, they will self-center. We're using coned-headed screws, not button-head or socket-head cock screws. It's coned-headed screws so that the weight will center, so we don't end up with somebody misaligning a weight and dragging on their shroud. And then it'll also come with an 18-pound spring for people to be able to experiment and play with how they can set the gun up for themselves to get the bolt manipulation they want and still have the same precision that they had before. I have 2 bench rest shooters without using weights on Rimrock Bs with light varmint guns. Their gun shot agged in the .1s with the standard 24-pound spring set up, but had harder bolt lift for a bench rest gun. The bolt lift that F-class guys will put up with, bench rest shooters doesn't like, because there's a different cadence and a different speed of shooting. It's not unusual to shoot 5 shots in 15 seconds in bench rest. And so the bolt manipulation, the opening cycle, as well as the closing cycle, becomes important. Both of those gentlemen are using 18-pound springs that I sent them. Their guns are still shooting the same size ags, but they're shooting 6 PPCs and 30 BRs with federal primers. So, and I don't want to mislead people or anybody to believe right now, I've viewed this saying, oh, I can go put this in my 7x65 PRCW that I'm using Wolf or CCI primers in, or, you know, what I mean, I don't, not there yet. That's not there. But what I am moving toward is doing the experimentation with the 18-pound spring, because I've got 2 FTR guys with their BRMs. Both of them have been accomplished FTR shooters, and they've always used the 24-pound springs, and I've sent them 18-pound springs to play with. And one of them recently posted his target. His standard deviation of his load went down, and his clusters of groups are just a nice little knot in the middle of the X-spring with the 18-pound spring. Now, he's using federal primers in the 308. So we haven't, and when I have the ones ready for the XD, folks will start getting them, including you, so that you can experiment with your Wolf primers. I'm really anxious to see if my paper calculations with the weights, prove out that we can move to the 18-pound spring with that cocking piece with the weight on it, and get the Wolf and CCI primers to perform at that lighter spring, which will make bolt manipulation a lot more robust.
So what I'm hearing is with your Black Knights, you have a larger bolt, which will have, it's a larger radius. So that in itself helps with leverage, right?
Right.
Number two, it gives you more room to do other things, such as, you have larger mass, right? And you're adding the cocking piece. It is larger, so it's allowing you to add weights to the back of it. Right. So from what I'm hearing is you can have the same weight spring. All right, let me back it up. So like a 24-pound spring, the result that you're getting with a 24-pound spring, you can drop to an 18-pound at the weights, maintain the same result. However, you will have a much easier bolt lift.
Right.
If you maintain the 24 and add the weights, I don't know.
That's something.
That's the question. Can we get smaller groups?
Exactly, Eric. That's one of the part of the decision or the experiment tree with the railgun that I intend to be doing, and then Brian Zolnikoff with the light varmint bench rest Black Knight, and Speedy will be testing. Okay, 18-pound spring, 24-pound spring, and with the different weights, and we'll have a big chart with a big box. How did this? Many different combinations, and hopefully be able to statistically prove what works and what doesn't at making the group smaller.
Right. Yeah, because
while at the same time improving bolt manipulation.
Right. Because what you're saying is people will have hopefully the option of, hey, you can keep your 24-pound spring at the weights, shrink the groups, or you can have the 18-pound spring, really super easy bolt manipulation. Maybe the groups aren't as small. Maybe they will be. Who knows, right? Because you have different weights that you can play around with. The point is that they'll have just another way to tune the rifles so that they can shoot smaller, and that bolt lift will be super easy. That makes you shoot faster, makes you or allows you to shoot faster, allows you to not disturb the rifle as you shoot, which leads to smaller groups as well. So I like where this is going.
And the 28-pound spring will still be an option too.
Correct.
So there will be an 18, 24, and a 28. And it'll be, folks will be able to play and figure out what works good for them to tune. And I got my own ideas on robustness of tune and which direction I would focus on, but that's but that gets into a whole other topic. I wouldn't be shooting inch 250 straight cylinder barrels if I was shooting F open. So
what would you be shooting? would you prefer tapered barrel?
I'd be shooting a number 17 taper barrel that would have a lower frequency vibration with a higher amplitude, that would have a wider tune window. The stiffer we make the barrels, they shoot, and that's the rail guns, the inch 350 diameter barrels, just absolutely used to drive me and my buddy Adamovich nuts. And in fact, one year, the two of us put our rail guns aside and shot our 10.5-pound guns in the rail gun class. Bob won it, and I think I was third at the Nationals, shooting 10.5-pound guns at rail guns. Because the weather conditions were changing so much, the temperature and the humidity and everything, and keeping those straight cylinder barrels with the straight cylinder barrels have a high natural frequency, very higher sine wave, frequency sine wave with a smaller amplitude of vibration. So the peaks and the valleys of the sine wave are very narrow. So when you're in tune, the weather doesn't have to change very much, and it doesn't affect guys as much that are preloaded in a match. Preloading helps, because if you preload in the same environmental conditions, those cartridges, even though the external pressure is changed, those cartridges, in my experience, have proven to stay in tune longer than if I'm loading at the range. Okay. And so, that's the only reason I mentioned that, is I've, like with the light gun 1,000 yard guns, most of them that I've built for guys have been number 17 taper or heavy varmint taper barrels, so that they would have a wider tune window, that have their guns stay in tune longer. But I kind of got us sidetracked there on that. And then that gets into the whole concept of tuning, and I don't know. I spend a lot of my time on the phone anymore with customers that got actions or rifles or any of the combinations about the whole topic of tuning.
So tapered barrels. Mm-hmm. So Speedy's the same way. He has what he calls the Speedy taper. Mm-hmm. He's against straight barrels. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it seems like everybody in F class is shooting. F open is shooting.
They're doing great
because of the barrel. The weight.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the same guy shooting a tapered barrel with the same cartridge.
Well, you know what the problem is, right? We have the equipment's already set up, so the minute you change the barrel, now the rifle balance is different. Now the weight's different. Mm-hmm. Everything's different. So it's almost like you require
a new rifle.
Almost, yeah. You can add weights and just it's just such a funny game that we're always. You set something, even changing it to a different scope. People say, well, how about you try this other scope? And we're looking at the weight. Oh, it's 4 ounces heavier. That means I need to change my rings, or I need to, remove material for the stock. It's just because a lot of us are running just right there at the edge of the maximum weight, because weight is a benefit, right? It reduces recoil. It is. Yep. And adds stability to the system. But I mean, I guess now I'm gonna go try a number 17. Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna try a couple of them. I don't like to just try one, but
you have to always have an N more than one. That's an N of one. A sample size of one is not a significant test. I agree with you. You have to have multiples. So, I don't know. And there's other things with the timing of the Black Knight XD. Right now, they're neutral timed, just like we've been timing actions for a number of years. Moved the hunting actions about 3 or 4 years ago from neutral to some cock on close. But we've moved back to neutral only because social media, YouTube, everything has educated people that neutral's the only way, and there must be something hooked to precision about neutral timing. No.
Explain what you're talking about when you talk about neutral timing and cock on close and all that good stuff.
Okay. What I mean by cock on close, well, the old cock on close system was the early Mausers that didn't cock at all unopened. The very first things. The bolt handle came up, you pulled the bolt back, and when you pushed it forward, you had to push forward on the bolt handle to cock the fire and force the lugs down to cock the firing pin. So they became known as cock on close. Then Remington and Winchester and others called theirs cock on open, but they weren't completely cock on open. Remingtons were about 60% cock on open, 40% cock on close. Winchesters varied all over the map in terms of how much cock on open, cock on close. And what I mean by that is I've got an action here. I'm not sure how show up, but well, okay. With neutral timing, you close the bolt and it goes down on the closing cams, and when it starts engaging the locking lugs, that cocking piece doesn't move. That's neutral. And then when you fire it, you have to lift the entire firing pin fall, and that's a neutral timed action.
So what you're saying is, if you have 250 thousandths firing pin fall, when you close the bolt, it's neutral, meaning it doesn't move. It was at 250. When you close the bolt, it stayed at 250. You fire it, the firing pin fell 250 thousandths. When you lift it up, when you open the bolt, that's when you're actually cocking the spring, or you're compressing the spring, and you have to compress it the full 250 thousandths. Because there's no other way to compress a spring other than when you lift the bolt. So
correct.
That's neutral.
That's neutral. Cock on close is when you fire the bolt, you can not compress the spring at all. That's full cock on close when you lift the bolt. And
well, that's not on a Remington 700 action. So.
No, that does not. I don't know if there's anybody making that kind of action anymore.
But you just explained the concept of cock on close. So what you're saying is on some, you can actually set your actions up, and a lot of manufacturers set them up that way, to where when you go to close the bolt, well, let's start with opening, right? You fire, the firing pin fell 250 thousandths, for example. But when you go to open the bolt, they only cock it, let's say 200 thousandths. They don't cock it all the way.
Correct.
You open it, and then when you go to close it, when you close the bolt, it catches the sear on the spring, on the sear on the trigger 50 thousandths short. So you have to push it 50 thousandths. So that's where you get the other 50 thousandths. So you cock on open 200 thousandths, on close you cock the other 50 thousandths. To get to 250. So they have the illusion of easier bolt lift, but in reality, it's easier simply because they're not cocking all the way when you open it.
That's exactly right.
But then when you go to close it, then you have the other 50 thousandths.
Yeah, 50 thousandths. And there can be a clunky 50 thousandths or a non-clunky 50 thousandths. By clunky, I mean the harder, the more spring pressure you use, the more you notice that 50 thousandths of cocking on the closing, because of going through the closing cam of the action, you get a little feel.
Right.
And my objective with the Black Knight XD and the Black Knight action is we're working on some prototypes that will, just as soon as you push the bolt forward to battery, there, the cocking piece will already be engaged with the sear on the trigger. So when you close it, you will be 50% cocking on close, but you won't feel it because there won't be a secondary motion. It'll be a one smooth motion. So
now, is one better than the other, or is just preference?
It's preference on feel. And what we want to have is an action that feels smooth, operates smooth, so it doesn't become a distraction in competition, or a distraction to a hunter. A hunter that's got its eye on a piece of game and needs to close the bolt because he didn't have one in the chamber, needs to have a bolt that will cycle and close without taking the eyes off it and say, what's going on here? Or that disruptive feeling. And there is way to make cock on close not be non-disruptive, so that, and in fact, I believe there's a way, I've yet to prove it out on one of our actions, which we're working on, is to have it feel just as good closing as a neutral timed action, but open 70%, 80% easier, which then we got the best of both worlds. We got a smooth close, we got a smooth open. And I have 2 guns yet that are Adamovich guns that were made in his stocks and with his sleeves that were timed that way 40 years ago. That and they felt great. They were great to operate on the bench, but we moved to neutral shortly after that, just because with some actions, the actions that we used in those were redone Remington 700s. And all actions that we were working with at the time, some of them custom, we couldn't get there because of the way the cams were cut in the bolts, and recutting a cam in the customer's bolt wasn't an option because we needed the cam to be shallower, not deeper. So that, and going neutral, it was easy to fix a cam in those bolts, because if you think about it, if you're only lifting 200 thousandths of firing pin fall and you're cocking 50, when you close the bolt on a cock on close action that was feeling clunky and hard to manipulate, the direction that pushed us going to the neutral, because we could recut the cam in the bolt to be deeper to transfer all that firing and get that nice smooth close.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we were using 16, 18 pound springs in bench rest guns, so the lift didn't become a deterrent. It was a nice smooth system. It's only when I started making actions for multi-purpose and different cartridges and the full range of primers that we got into, now we need 24 pound springs and 24 and 28 pound springs to operate reliably in the cold with particular brands of primers. And so we kind of moved into the neutral area by default, because that's how we could modify existing bolts without thinking about, hey, if I'm producing a bolt from scratch, how can I get the best of both worlds? Right. And that's what I'm trying to work on. That will be a next generation of a Black Knight, is that concept.
If I'm building a hunting rifle in, I don't know, 6.5 Creedmoor, I'm talking about my Blackjack or my Ethical Hunter Challenge.
Yeah.
What action would you recommend that I use?
If you're going to use a chassis rifle with detachable box magazines, or a fiberglass stock with detachable box magazines, the Mountaineer.
Mountaineer, okay.
Borden Mountaineer. If you're going to use an internal Remington style, or using the Wyatt boxes, internal boxes and stuff, then the Alpine Magnum. And it's not called Magnum because it has a Magnum bolt face. It's Alpine Magnum because it's got a longer bolt port and a longer magazine well. But most of the guys I see shooting that hunting challenge are using, so far the videos I've seen have been primarily chassis-based or detachable box magazine-based systems, which would be the Mountaineer.
Okay. All right. I'm about to build the ultimate. It's going to be the
deer
ultimate.
Gun?
It's. I mean, it will be able to take deer, but I'm going to build it. Purposely built for this challenge. It's going to be a pretty ridiculous rifle by a lot of people's standards, not by mine, but it's going to be it's going to be a purpose-built rifle. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be big, and it's going to be within the rules, but it's going to push the limits. I mean, just kind of it's a competition rifle that is. It can be used for hunting, but it's going to be pretty.
And that's for the hunting challenge with the deer target. Is that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm gonna use that, but it's probably going to be, obviously it's going to be for that, but it's going to be more. I'm going to try to build a rifle that can take all 12 targets on the blackjack challenge. That means I have to be able to hit the 2-inch 6 times, 7 times in a row. Which requires 500 yards. It requires quite a bit of a very specialized rifle. I mean, to be able to do that. But anyway, Jim, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Welcome back anytime. And I'm really excited about the Black Knight series of actions that you have. I believe they are going to change the game once again. All
right. Thanks, Eric. Good. Appreciated the time.
Thank you, Jim.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.